Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video. We're going to take a look at a pretty cool knife today. This is the Cold Steel SR1. Now, this is based on the SRK, a very, very well-known cold steel survival knife. Not only well-known, but very well-loved. And you know, this knife is kind of then designed with that kind of purpose in mind, a survival or tactical type of blade. And in that role, I think it works okay, all right? And I want to get that out there right away because of something really important. When I'm reviewing this knife, and as I go through my comments, you need to understand that I am looking at this knife as not an EDC knife, okay, as a survival knife or as a tactical knife rather than an EDC blade, because it's just outlandish for EDC, okay? It is definitely an overbuilt, hard use kind of knife, and it's really embraced that role and tried to be that. And so to compare this to something like a Para 2 or a Benchmade 943 or 940, I should say, just wouldn't make sense, right? It's not a fair comparison because the design criteria were totally different for those knives versus this knife. All right, so I want to get that out of the way right at the beginning and then point out that that brings some pluses and minuses, okay? So there are some things that a big knife is going to do well, and there are some things that a big knife is not going to do well. And that's kind of par for the course when you get into sort of hard use, survival, tactical type of knives. So starting off with size and weight, and that's one of the first places you'll notice this begin to, you know, the size really begin to stand out. 9 3/8 inches. So this is a big knife, okay? 9 3/8 is not a small size. Blade on this guy is 3 7/8, and that's pretty typical for Cold Steel. They always say 4 inches on their blades. They are always 3 7/8. I've had a number of 4-inch Cold Steel knives that were 3 7/8, so that's pretty common. 5 7/16 on the handle length. So that is the closed length, all right? And it's actually pretty long. The closed length on this guy is fairly long. So some pants, you know, if there's not enough depth in the pocket there, you may have an issue getting this into some pairs of pants. It's over 1/2 inch thick, so about 9/16 thick, maybe a teeny bit more than that, but not very much. And 9/16 again is not outlandish. I've got other knives that are just that thick and they carry okay. And in fact, this one, we normally talk about how it carries at this point, and I've actually got to give it some credit because for a knife of its size and for a knife with the width and the heftiness of its components, it actually carries surprisingly well. I'm not going to say, you know, I'm going to wear this in a pair of track pants or running shorts or something, but if you're wearing like a pair of jeans or a pair of khakis, I don't have any problem with it. I don't find it uncomfortable at all. Of course, you know, if you're wearing a pair of dress pants, yeah, you're going to want to avoid this. But I'd be interested to know why you're wearing dress pants in a situation that would necessitate this knife. All right, so that's size and weight and carry. Let's now talk about the blade. And the blade is something we want to spend a little bit of time on. This is S35VN steel clip point blade with a flat grind, okay? Very, very thick blade stock on here, 193 thousandths. So very, very thick on that stock. Fairly flat, fairly low flat grind. So this knife is a very abrupt angle, okay? So it's opened to pretty wide, which means it's not a great slicer, okay? It's pretty thick behind the edge at, I did write it down here somewhere. Yeah, 48 thousandths of an inch. So that's thick, guys. I measured a few other knives just to give you some comparisons. Recon 1 was 29 thousandths, the American Lawman was 23 thousandths, and even the Hinderer Fatty, the Warncliffe Fatty that I have here, this knife is 30 thousandths. So we're talking about a good bit more than all of those knives. It is very thick behind the edge, and that is designed, and it's designed to be that way so that it's very, very tough. Now, the sacrifice you make for having that tough blade is that it's not going to slice as well as it could. All right, and this is where I feel like they've gotten this balance a little bit off. And if they had ground this, you know, right up to here, you know, add another 1/8 of an inch to this grind, thin it out just a little bit, I would probably like this blade just a little bit more because, let's be honest, even if you're carrying this as a survival knife, right? This is a tactical survival tool and that's the only reason you're carrying it. Maybe you even have a secondary sort of lightweight primary folder. Well, there's probably going to be some occasions where you want to cut something else, okay, where you don't need to stab through body armor, you're not need trying to skin a dinosaur or chop down a tree. All you want to do is open an envelope or something like that, or cut a seatbelt. And this knife is not going to be as well suited to those tasks because they have definitely pushed it very much in that direction of toughness. So you've got to make some sacrifices when you do that, and they sacrificed slicing ability. And so if you're looking for a knife that can, slice up a tomato, this is not your best bet. Okay, I mean, it will slice it up, and it'll slice an apple too. I think I posted some pictures, but it's going to slice an apple like the way you would split wood with an axe. Okay, you cut about a third of the way, or you cut about 3/8 of an inch into it, and then it breaks in half. Okay, that's how this knife slices. So, again, very, very tough. Oh, by the way, I haven't said a thing about the steel. S35 VN steel, great steel. Absolute fan of that. And the performance on it, as heat treated here by Cold Steel, seems to be pretty good. I certainly, can't complain, and certainly haven't noticed like, hey, this edge is deteriorating quicker than anything else, or it's super impossible to strop or anything like that. So it just seems to be a pretty nicely done S35 VN steel. Let's go ahead now. So we've talked about the blade, and that is a limitation. Okay, so look how thick that is. We've given you the edge geometry as well. So that's a big, heavy, thick blade, and that does create some limitations, but then it also creates some extra abilities, which are all pertaining to strength. And if you wanted to baton, I wouldn't recommend that with any folder, but this would be on the short list of ones I'd say you're probably going to be okay. All right. Let's go ahead now and talk about lockup and deployment, which is, of course, the other reason I feel pretty good about batoning with this knife. It is a triad lock, and the lock bar is very thick, even thicker than the blade. I measured this at 200 thousandths of an inch. So very, very thick stock on that triad lock. And I've got to give credit for one thing. This knife is really, really smooth. So definitely noticeably different than a lot of the Cold Steel knives I have, both in deployment. So when you're actually, getting ready to put this knife into use, it feels really good. I'm not going to be able to flick it out for you on camera, but I can if I'm in a normal situation where I'm not trying to reach around a camera. The lock bar is also really nice on this. Definitely one of the more comfortable Cold Steels that I have. Part of that is just because the thickness on that lock bar, right? You're pushing on a much more comfortable surface because it's just too thick to really cause your thumb any problems. But also it is really, really smooth, and maybe the spring tension is not as tight as it has been on some of the other Cold Steels that I've had. Still, you can see how much travel there is on that lock. That is very, very well locked up. In addition to the triad lock, as you were used to, they've also included stainless steel liners in here for part of the knife. So if you flip around this way, you can see it's mostly G10, but back here where the lock components get kind of attached to the handle, they have included a stainless steel liner to increase that strength. So they really have gone above and beyond to make this a very strong, very durable knife. And they've done a pretty good job in terms of fit and finish and just feel and all of that side of the coin when it comes to this lockup and deployment. The only Cold Steel that I have that I would say is nicer would be this one. And this guy is a little smoother. It's a little nicer feeling on the lockup, okay? But otherwise, this is barring the Formax, this is the nicest Cold Steel that I've felt in terms of just how smooth the lock is, how easy it is to actuate, all that kind of stuff. Thumb stud on this is massive. You can see I have tried this knife out with gloves a few times, and I really do think they've given that some thought because it works really, really nicely in gloves, and it almost, like many Cold Steels, and we've talked about this lots with Cold Steel knives, this knife is really, really comfortable. If you put a pair of gloves on, you can do everything you need to do. Like, you've got a nice big recess here, nice big thumb stud. Everything is easy to work. It's almost like it's designed to be a knife for elderly people, like one of those phones with the giant buttons on them, right? Anyone who's watching who's a little older, no hard feelings there. I just know that, dexterity becomes a bit of an issue as we age. I'm sure I'll experience the same thing as I get older. So yeah, knife works really, really well. The action is pretty pleasant, especially for a cold steel. And now let's talk a little bit about the handle. Now, if you can take one look at this, you probably right away realize this is going to be a pretty comfortable handle. It's hard to make a knife handle this thick and this large and this hand filling without it being pretty comfortable. In addition, you do have that nice finger choil that I really appreciate, and you can even kind of back up on the knife and get down here and have sort of a little extra reach if you ever wanted that. And so in terms of ergonomics, yeah, this is very, very good. But, okay, and the but is, that's not all that impressive for a knife of this size, okay? When you have a big handle, it's virtually always going to be comfortable unless you have a bunch of sharp edges or something that don't make any sense. In terms of construction, we already saw the G10 and the stainless steel liners there, so I don't want to, there's not a whole lot to say about that. It is very, very solid. And the fit and finish is very nice. We've got a G10 backspacer back here. Lanyard hole is a little small, and that's one thing I would pick on this knife for, just a little. Of all the knives, I'm not a lanyard guy at all. But if there ever was a knife that I'd want a lanyard on, it would be something I'd be using for bushcrafting or even maybe in a tactical role, because those are times where you're a little more likely to drop your knife, and it's a little more important that you don't drop your knife. Okay, so I could, I'm going to pick on the lanyard hole just a little because it would have been nice to see that at least big enough for 550 cord. Clip is very, very stiff. It is reversible to left or right hand, and this is a very ambidextrous knife, and that's pretty common for backlocks. They're generally well suited to left or right-handed users. And this one is definitely no exception. The lock bar is the pocket clip is easily switchable, but it is very stiff, and you may have to do the little trick. On a lot of my cold steel knives, I'll take, a very small pry tool, slide it under here, and just spring that up a little bit. Now, listen. This is not a tutorial on how to do that, nor am I recommending you do it. Okay, I have gone too far with that and ended up with a clip that was overly loose now, and I had a hard time keeping it in my pocket. That's a very real risk. So I'm not suggesting that everyone who's watching this go out and do that to other cold steel knives, because you may wreck it, okay? Just wanted to put that out there while we're kind of talking about all of that. Not much else to say. It's not a bearing pivot. I guess you wouldn't expect it to be one. So not much else to say about that. It is very smooth for what it is, and certainly the lockup is absolutely rock solid. Now, let's get some comparisons, and the first comparison I'm going to make is probably the most obvious one, and that is to the Formax. It's hard to even fit them both on screen. These guys, the main question that I think people would have about this is, is this like a budget-friendly replacement for the Formax? And my answer to that is no. Okay, the Formax is larger, it's more comfortable, it cuts better, it's definitely more utilitarian. It's going to be pretty well just as tough. I guess with the slight possibility, because it's thinner behind the edge, I suppose there is a very slight possibility that you could chip that edge or break that edge off. But, I mean, that's a huge chunk of steel. I'm not too worried about damaging it in any way. The Formax is definitely more comfortable. It's nicely rounded, and it is smoother for sure, okay? Now, having said all of that, the SR1 is much, much nicer to carry. All right, now let me know in the comments, guys. I may do a full comparison between these two. I have had people ask me like, hey, I'm looking at this or that. And it, although I don't totally get it, because they're even quite a bit different in look, size, feel, blade shape. There's a lot of differences here. But if you want me to do a full comparison, let me know down in the comments, and I'm not opposed to doing that at all. Let's get some other comparable knives in here. Here's one that I think you ought to consider. If you really are thinking, hey, I'm gonna go pick up an SR1, I would take a look at a Recon one. No, it's not as thick blade stock, but that means it'll cut really, really well. The lockup is gonna be pretty well just as solid. The ergonomics are just as good, maybe even a little bit better. And you're gonna be able to cut really well. I love the blade on the Recon 1. Very, very thin behind the edge, nice and slicey. Really, yeah, this is one of my favorite, just general use production knives. I love the Recon 1. and for most people that are looking at an SR1, I would say go to this. Okay, I really would. There are going to be those exceptions where people really need a knife that they can pound on and twist and bend and contort in all kinds of ways. And then yeah, you might need to go to the SR1. Okay, but I think for most people, the Recon 1 is probably going to do the job. It's going to cost less and it's going to cut way better. A couple more here. I'm going to bring this in just for a quick alternative. This to me is what this knife would look like in a very handy small EDC style package. American Lawman again is just a modern classic as far as I'm concerned, and one of the best knives. You know, in fact, probably for most people, if you called me and said I just want one good folding knife, this is what I'm going to recommend for 85% of people out there. Couple more here, guys, just because this is a hard use knife. It would have been nice to bring in like a Strider and a Medford Praetorian and stuff like that. And I do think this will hang all day long with a Praetorian, with a Strider, any other hard use knife you want to throw at it. This thing is going to do just what they'll do, and maybe even be, well, in fact, in reality, be stronger than even most of those knives. So here's one pretty well-known hard use knife. This, of course, is the XM18, and this is the fatty edition, so it's even more heavily built. It's one of the only knives I have in my collection that's as thick as this knife. I guess the Formax is actually thicker than both of them, but again, very much a hard use knife, very well done. And again, if all you're wanting is something that satisfies that kind of cool factor in you, that you've got a knife that's just indestructible and amazing, this is going to be a pretty good option, even compared to some really nice stuff like the Hinderers or Striders, or the last knife I'm going to bring in is this knife. This is the Curtis F3, and of course this is again designed to be a pretty tough, pretty overbuilt knife. It is pretty hefty, six ounces and change for sure. Very thick blade stock, but not as thick. Get those two side by side. So it is thick blade stock, but not to the same extent as this guy is. And again, this is a wonderful knife. It is beautifully done, and I absolutely love this knife. There are a lot of things, by the way, this knife does better, including carries nicer and cuts much better. But again, is it tougher? Is it stronger? Is it more durable than this? I don't think so. Okay, so what they have really done here with the SR1 is gone like above and beyond the Call of Duty when it comes to toughness and durability. Okay, this is a true overbuilt knife, and it is right up there as tough and useful and durable as any zero tolerance. Even if you go back to the the 300, the 560, the 0200, all those original Strider Ken Onion collaboration knives, this is going to hang with them any day of the week and probably be even more durable. Strider, Hinderer, Praetorian, Medfords, sorry guys, this thing is a tank, and it deserves that term tank more than any knife that I can think of. It really is overbuilt, and overbuilt to the point that you can use it and be pretty confident in just about anything, okay? Now, does that mean it'll never break? No, of course not, right? How many hammers have I broken in my lifetime? At least I can think of 3 right off the top of my head, and they're meant to be pounded on, okay? So you can break anything, but in the typical things that you would think of using a knife for, this is going to hold up, and you're going to have no issues with it, okay? So the only sort of what would I say here? The only thing I would say in closing is the Formax is going to be every bit as tough, but just be slightly more versatile, because this will slice really, really well. This is a really nice slicing knife, and this is not. So that is an important factor to consider. Of course, the size and weight and cost of this are going to have a big impact on that whole discussion. So there you go, guys. Cold Steel SR1, really, really overbuilt knife. And as an overbuilt, hard use, bushcrafting, survival, tactical knife, this is great, okay? I have no issue with it. As an EDC knife, there's probably a lot of options that would be better for you out there, But if you just like something that's stupidly big and heavy and just can take a licking, hey, go nuts. This is going to be a great knife, and it's absolutely going to make you feel like, yeah, I've got a knife in my pocket that can just take whatever the world throws at it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will talk to you soon.